Okay, so we're holding on DAF Lamed, Amud Aleph, about 8 lines down. And just as a reminder where we were, so the Mishnah had talked about a couple of scenarios where it seemed to be a difference of opinion regarding whether or not when setting up an ERU, the size of the ERU, or the amount of food that's left, is dependent upon what the normative amount would be, that is a regular amount, or dependent upon the specific person leaving it. So talked, for instance, about, you'll help me out to recall the specific instances. We talked about a Nazir leaving wine, and we talked about Truma being left by Yisrael. And as part of this ongoing discussion, there seems to be two different opinions in the matter. Surprise, surprise. So we also talked about Rav Shimon ben Elazar, and we'll just backtrack a little bit on the on Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, where it refers to Shimon ben Elazar, Arvim lechola ulezaken ulekatan is correction kedei mizona uleravtan bisuda beinonit shokol adam. So he seems to be covering all different bases here. But the first situation seems to be that it's specific to the person. The chola lezaken and the katan is specific to the person who's leaving it, and the second, however, the ravtan, the glutton, seems to be going with whatever's normative, whatever the usual amount that is expected of a regular person in society. So with the assumption that Rav Shimon ben Elazar holds that it goes by a regular amount, so we're going to see now Ibayalahu coming down to the 8th line, Daf Lamed, those who are just entering. Ibayalahu pligi Rabbanan aleh de Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and so the Rabbanan ask on him, do they argue with him or lo? So Tashma, let's see if we can figure it out. Amar Rabba bar Barchana Amar Rav Yochanan Og Melch Habashan, and we introduced Og yesterday, not necessarily Og specifically, but a person of very large proportion. Pitcho ba'arba, with regard to taking out the corpse from a house. And just look in Rashi, while it's not exactly this part of the Gemara, if you look Pitcho Kimlo, Lahatzil al Sh'ar Ptachim, V'ileka Petach Dechazile Kol Chur Male Egrof Shebekatolim Tmeim. So when removing a body from a house, which egress do you remove them? Which portal do you remove them through? So as long as all the ptachim are smaller than arba tfachim ba'arba tfachim, they're not rawi to remove the body. You need at least one that's larger to get the body out. But once you have one that's larger, normally you take it out through the largest. But what if you have several different ptachim, all larger than dalid by dalid? Then they're all potentially ways of taking the body out, and they're all therefore potentially tameh portals. However, if there's one that seems much more likely to be the way that you would take the body out, namely, as we're assuming now, the largest one, then normally you take the body out to the largest one, and all the other portals remain tahor. They don't become automatically tameh. However, what do you do in a case of a very, very large body, like that of potentially Og Melch Habashan? So there you would, if you hold that the size of it has to be specific to the situation, specific to this particular body, then obviously it would have to be a very, very large portal. If, on the other hand, you say that the portal goes by the average person, it's normative, so you see now the connection to what we're talking about with Rav Shimon ben Elazar. If you say it can go in keeping with the normative, then you don't need to have it be extremely large. It can just be the largest one amongst those portals that are larger than dalid by dalid. So we see here that the opinion of Damara of Archana Marav Yochanan Habashan Pitcho ba'arba, that you do take them out even though it's not huge. There it seems to hold like the average sized person, and it seems not like Rav Shimon ben Elazar, who would hold that it goes by the specifics of the person involved. Hatam de'ika ptachim katanim tuva. No, you know what we're talking about that case? You cannot learn from that case that the Rabbanan hold against Rav Shimon ben Elazar. You can't hold that they assume that you go by the normative, because that if you have many small tachim, if many of the portals are very small, but you have one that's larger, that largest one, what are you going to do? Well, you're not going to leave the body in there just because you don't have a portal large enough to take it out. You're going to widen, you're going to open up, you're going to cause an increasing breach, and whatever portal happens to be the largest. So if this one happens to be the largest, then you're going to widen it further. So that's why this one would become Tameh, while all the other ones remain Tahor. So you cannot learn from that, from a situation that we talk about with regard to leaving an Eruv, because leaving an Eruv, the size is the size. You're not going to be changing the size after the fact. But here, with regard to the size of the portal in and out of the house, you are going to be changing the size. You're going to be increasing the size of the largest one. Let's see in Rashi, Petachim Ketanim, Pchutim Midalad al Dalad, Bahahu Meravich, Hilkach Matzil al Kulan. So by enlarging the one portal that's the begin with is the largest, you therefore save all the other portals from becoming Tameh. They remain Tahor because no one would take the body out through those others. Of al Kulan, Shavim Bedalet, O Beyud, O Be'eser Amot, Kulan Tmeim. If you have many large portals, potentially you could take the body out through any of those. Layadi Bahai Meravich. You don't know which one they're going to widen because they have a number of different possibilities. This is expanding beyond the case we just discussed in the Gemara. Umapik va'afilu niftach echad mehem va'acherim sugurim. But if there happens to be one portal which is open and all the other ones are locked or shuttered up, or the one has already been designated as this is the portal through which I'm going to take the body. As we learned elsewhere, so that is one other way. These are other ways of designating, aside from assuming that one, because it's the largest, is going to be the one that's going to be Tameh because you can remove the body through that way. There are other ways that can be designated as this is the portal to allow all other portals to remain Tahor. But so Rashi expands on that topic. But returning to our case in the Gemara, Amar Rav Chia bar Rav Ashi, Amar Rav Ma'arvin bebasar chai. So now we're going to move away from this topic of do you hold like the regular sized person, the normative, or do you hold that it has to be special for the person who left the Eruv? We're going to leave that, but we're going to return to it on the Amud BAYT. Now we're going to come back to a different topic, and this is what are the different kinds of foods that can be used to make an Eruv. So Amar Rav Chia bar Rav Ashi Amar Rav Ma'arvin basar chai, raw meat. Now you can only make an Eruv with edible food. So what is referred to by basar chai, as was indicated earlier on yesterday's DAF, basar chai is not purely raw, but is sufficiently treated so that it is barely edible. So it can be, for instance, salted or minimally cooked, but it's still considered raw compared to normal food, but it is treated to the point that it is edible. So you can make an Eruv with the raw meat. Amar Rav Shimi bar Chia Ma'arvin bebeitzim chayot, and similarly with raw eggs, for those who are Rocky aficionados who like the first movie, then this is, he showed us an example of how raw eggs also can be edible. V'kama, how many raw eggs would you need in order to make the Eruv? It has to be worthy of 2 meals. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Sinai Amar Shtaim. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak quotes Sinai, who Rashi explains his Kavri. Rav Yosef is called Sinai. Levisha Baki b'mishnayos u'b'varaitot. He was very baki, as if you were hearing it from Har Sinai. So he says 2 raw eggs make up enough for an Eruv. So now we come to back to the Mishnah that comments on Nodir min Amazon mutar b'mayim. So that someone who is actually I'm not sure this is the Mishnah or is it for Reiter, but someone who says I'm nodir from mazon, I'm not going to allow myself to partake of mazon. Nevertheless, he is still allowed to partake of mayim and melach. So melach u'mayim hu delo ikri mazon. So we see from this that when you use the word mazon, what is he referring to? What specifically is he excluding? It seems to be he's excluding all food except for salt and water. Ha kol mili ikri mazon. So everything else outside of that is considered mazon. So lema tehavet tiyufta de Rav Shmuel. So this seems not according to the opinions of Rav Shmuel. The Rav Shmuel, the Amri Travayu, ein mevarchin borei minei mezonot, and this is in Masechet Brachot, not surprisingly, that when you make a bracha borei minei mezonot, that has to be ella. It's only on al chameshet haminim bilvad. It's only on wheat, rye, spelt, barley, and oats. And anything else, you don't say borei minei mezonot. So any other food outside of the chamisha minim would not be considered mazon. So when the person says neder mazon, it's not excluding all foods outside of water and salt. It's excluding many other foods as well. So it seems that they have two different opinions of what is referred to by mazon. But we already had this argument against Rav Shmuel. Nami meha. So we could also argue a tiyufta on them from here. Amar Rav Huna, but it's because we already had in Masachet Brachos, there was already differing opinions about this subject. So why don't we also bring an argument from here as to what constitutes mazon? So Amar Rav Huna, but Omer Kol Hazan Alai Ma'im Umelach Hu Delozayne Hakol Mili Zayne. So there's a difference between the word mizonos and the word hazan. Hazan refers to sustenance. Mizonos refers specifically to the chameshet meaning. Sustenance is all foods which sustain, which includes not just those that come from the 5 grains, but also all foods which can sustain, which includes everything except for water and salt, which do not give sustenance. So we have an argument, we have a question now with regard to what causes sustenance and what does not, whether or not you include foods that are not within the chameshet meaning as providing sustenance. From this case of Rabbi Bar Chana, who was following after Rabbi Yochanan, Lamechel peri de genosar. And peri de genosar, occasionally we see in the Gemara, is this wonderful, fantastic fruit. Rashi explains, it's yam kineret uperotea metukim, that exceedingly sweet and delicious fruit. And elsewhere, I think it was described the Rav, a different Rav who ate a tremendous amount of these delicious fruit. They were so amazing. Back in the Gemara, ki havinan be meya, that if you were 100 people had been following Rav Yochanan, hava menaktinan lekol chad v'chad asara asara. Each one of the 100 would have plucked 10 fruit for a total of 1,000 fruit plucked. And ki havinan be'asara hava menaktinan lekol chad v'chad meya meya. If there had been 10 people after him, they would have plucked 100 each. Clearly, I guess there were 1,000 available. So regardless, they would have taken as much as seemingly as much as they could have gotten because these fruit were so amazing. V'chol meya minahu lo hava machzik lehu tzana bat plata savai that if even they're so large that he'd taken 100 of them, they would not have filled up a basket of. They would have filled up a basket of 3 sa. So they were quite very large, not only succulent but also large. And what happened? And you would eat them all. You would eat them all up, like Rav Yochanan would have. That they were falling would eat them all up. Va'amar shuatelo delotayim li ziyuna. And Rav Yochanan said, after eating so much of these perot genosar, he said that I'm still not sustained by them. So that they not provide sustenance. So how could it be that he eats so much fruit and it didn't provide sustenance? No, ema mizona. Now what he was referring to, he's not eaten any mizonos yet. So he ate sustenance that it provided sustenance to him, these perot genosar, but it was not one of the chamisha meanings, so it was not to fall into the category of mizonos. And this illustrates the same point made earlier, the difference between hazan to provide sustenance versus mizonos, which is restricted to the chameshes meaning. So now we continue in the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Shua shelo ochel kikar zo, that if somebody says, and here we're going to be specific with regard to the wording again, and here Rav Huna is of the opinion that if someone makes a shua, I'm not going to eat from this kikar, from this loaf of bread, azu me'arvim lo, he can still make an ERU from that bread. What gain is he getting? He may not be eating from it, but he's gaining an ERU from it. He's gaining his 2,000 amas in one direction from it. So you can use it as an ERU because he has not made a shvua against gaining that advantage. He's only made the shvua against eating it. Kikar zo alai. But if he says, he makes a shua that I will not gain anything from the kikar at all, zo alai, if anything, he cannot use it as an eruv. He cannot gain the advantage, not eating it and not setting up an eruv from it. So Rav Huna is of the opinion that there's a distinction in the specific wording of the shua between saying shelo ochel and zo alai. Okay? So, Meitvei. So we ask a question on this because it's not at all clear that there is such a distinction to be made between the words ochel and alai. Meitvei, we ask, hanoder mina kikar, that someone who makes a neder not to use the kikar, ma'arvim lo ba, that you can make an eruv with it. So what's this talking about? My love, the amar alai. Isn't that a case where he said alai, that he said I'm not going to get any benefit from the kikar and still you can make an eruv? So that's a question of Rav Huna. Lo, the amar zu. He only said zu, not going to get from this kikar zu, and maybe he meant only achila. He's only maybe referring to only achila, and by not using the word alai, he's not restricted himself from all benefit from the kikar.
It does have the potential to be maternator, that he can use this thing?
Yes, and that is yes, so that is, it depends when you're talking, because even going back to the Mishnah, it was questionable if you could be, again, it goes back to the earlier question, is it the normative? Do you go by the regular person, in which case you could rejoin that regular person by mater neder, and we'll get into a little more detail later in the DAF. So maybe we'll hold the question, we'll come back to it in a little while. So second line, hachinami mistabra, the second wide line, hachinami mistabra, diktani seifa. We continue on in the seifa. Ematai bisman amar shvua. As we continue in that baraisa, ematai bisman amar shvua shelo it amena. Aval amar alai. So sorry, what is it talking about? What's this case talking about? When he does a shua, that he will not taste from it. Aval amar alai, when he says alai, use the word alai, that seems to restrict him from all benefit. What would you do in that case? Is it the same situation that he's still able to eat it or not, to use it as an eruv or not? Hachiname de ein me'arvin lo ba. That there's also a situation, if he uses a lie, also he still can't use it as an eruv. So it seems to be confusing in terms of what is the terminology that one can make an eruv with it and one which is not. It seems to be, excuse me, it seems to be, as we understand it now, that as he says a lie, it seems to fit in with Rav Huna, at least for the moment, that if he says a lie, then he cannot gain any benefit from it, and he can't make an eruv with it. But we continue to ask on Rav Huna's opinion. Ihachi adetani kikar zo hekdesh. If someone made a kikar hekdesh, ein ma'arvim lo ba, lefisha ein ma'arvim behekdeshot. So that you cannot use it as for your eruv, because you cannot use hekdeshos in that fashion. So if that's the case, if really the differentiation between ability to use a kikar as your eruv or not is depending on whether or not you made it a hekdesh, liflog v'litne b'dida, then we've learned it this way according to hekdesh. But if really could make a difference also on the basis of alai or zo, if that also was a difference, that you've limited yourself not to eat it or no benefit from it, if that also was a difference, instead of giving the details in this baraisa that you're not allowed to be ma'arif for something that's hekdesh, you should also make another distinction with it. Liflug v'litne b'didei b'med dvarim amurim da'amar zu aval amar alai ein ma'arvim lo. If you're making a list of the distinctions by which you can or cannot use some of the kikar as an eruv, you shouldn't just limit yourself to saying because you made it hekdesh or you didn't make hekdesh. It should also have continued and given the further detail that had you used the word alai versus zu, then that also would have been a difference whether or not being able to use it for eruv or not. And since it did not bring that distinction, it seems to be that there is no such distinction when using alai or zo. That regardless of whether you say alai or zo, you're not either you are allowed to use it for an eruv or you're not allowed to use it for an eruv. But there's no differentiation in terms of using that wording. So this is a question on Rav Huna. So Amar lecha Rav Huna elamai kol heichad amar alai ma'arvim kasha. Kasha Reisha. There's still if you say that if you say a lie, you can do an eruv. That's a kasha on the Reisha, because here they seem to that you are allowed to use it as an eruv. That same baraisa that taught that you can't use it if you makdish it, if you made a hekdesh, you can't use it for an eruv. There, the Reisha of that same baraisa seems to suggest that if you say a lie, you are allowed to make an eruv from it. So what's going on here? What is that? What are we coming to learn from that? So Rav Huna is going to answer how his presentation should have been originally. Chasri mechasra. This is the way there was wording that was missing. V'hachiktani hanoder min hakikar. That someone who makes a neder on the kikar ma'arvim lo ba, you can use it for an eruv. Va'afilu amar alai, that even if you use the word alai, you're still able to make an eruv. That's the way we learned it from that baraisa. Nasek omer shua shelo it amena, it's as if that someone says a shua that I will not taste it. So from this baraisa, which we originally thought to be a question of Rav Huna, that question still remains extant, because now we understand the Reisha to say that all cases of either alai or zo, you are allowed to use it as an eru, as opposed to Rav Huna, who suggested that zu and alai, there's a differentiation, that zu you are allowed to use it for an eru because you're only limiting eating, versus alai where you're limiting yourself from all benefits. So mikom makom kasha Rav Huna. So there's still a question on Rav Huna, because this brisa that we brought shows there is no differentiation between and that wording. In both cases, you are allowed to use it for an eru. So he's tried to answer it differently. Who de amar Rabbi Eliezer? So maybe he does have support. The Rav Huna goes according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer Shua Shelo Ochel Kikar Zo Ma'arvim Lo Ba Kikar Zo Alai Ein Ma'arvim Lo Ba, which seems to fit exactly with Rav Huna. That if you use the wording Bo, that you're only limiting yourself from eating and you can use it for an eru, versus Alai, where you're limiting yourself from all benefit and you cannot use it as an eru. So hang on a second. Umi Amar Rav Eliezer Hachi, but did Rav Eliezer really hold that way? V'hatanya, we learned in a different baraita. The Tanakama said, "Kol Adam Oser Atzmo beOcher Ma'arvim Lo Bo Ochel Nasar Lo LaAdam Ein Ma'arvim Lo Ba." That if the person, the Tanakama, which is not material to our discussion whether we're following now, but the Tanakama says that if somebody restricts himself from the kikar in terms of eating, he's still able to make an eru from it, and if he disallows himself from using it completely, then he cannot use it as an eru. But then we say Rabbi Eliezer, who we said was the support for Rav Huna, that there's a differentiation on the basis of bo or alai. Here the Baraisa says Rabbi Eliezer Omer Kikar Zo Alai Ma'arvim Lo Ba, that even if he uses the word alai, he's still able to make an eru Kikar Zo Hekdesh, but if he makes Hekdesh Ein Ma'arvim Lo Ba, which seems to hold exactly like the previous Baraisa from which we brought the question on Rav Huna after we corrected for Chasim or Chasra. In other words, that the fine wording Zo or alai, regarding which wording you use, you are allowed to use it for an eru. We do not differentiate on those grounds, but only if you make it hekdesh, then you can't be ma'ariv, because we're not allowed to use hekdeshos for an eru. So there, the fish ein ma'arvim lo behekdesh, to complete that baraisa. So we see that Rabbi Eliezer holds, in fact, not like Rav Huna. He holds like that baraisa that we brought to question Rav Huna, that there's no difference between zo and alai. So what do we have to answer? Trei tanai v'aliba the Rabbi Eliezer. So we say, you know what? There's two different opinions as to what Rabbi Eliezer said. One opinion holds that he said it exactly like that earlier baraisa, that the only differentiation is on the basis of hekdesh and not the wording. Regardless of the wording bo or alai, you're able to make an eru. Whereas the second opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that's not brought down in this baraisa, but we brought earlier, there's a support for Rav Huna, suggesting that yes, there is a differentiation between the word zo and alai. Zo is restricting only ochel, and therefore you can use it as an eru, whereas alai is restricting from all benefit and cannot use it as an eru. Now we come back to our Mishnah. Ma'arvim l'nazir b'yayin v'chula. So again, this is a case mentioned at the outstart, that a nazir normally can't drink wine, but according to the first opinion in our Mishnah, a nazir can use yayin as a eru. Matnitin deloka Beit Shammai. So the opinion in our Mishnah is not like Beit Shammai. The Tanya Beit Shammai Omrin Ein Ma'arvim l'nazir b'yayin u'lisrol b'truma. That the second case I mentioned at the outset also was from our Mishnah, was that Yisrael could use a truma according to the original opinion in our Mishnah. So for both cases brought from our Mishnah, Beit Shammai seems to stand against, stating that a nazir cannot use wine, even though wine would be fine for the normative case, for the regular person could use wine, but a nazir, because he specifically cannot drink wine, cannot use it for an eruv according to Beit Shammai. And similarly, Yisroel, who cannot eat from truma, cannot use truma, even though another person like a Hacohen could. So Beis Hillel Omrin Ma'arvim l'nazir b'yayin. So Beis Hillel holds like our Mishnah that a nazir can use yayin for an eruv, l'Yisroel b'truma, and also Yisroel can use truma. Amru lahen Beit Hillel Beit Shammai, and on top of that, Beit Hillel responds to Beit Shammai, Iyatem modim, do you not admit sheme'arvin l'gadol b'yom kippurim? So do you not agree that a gadol can set aside food on Yom Kippur? Look in Rashi, the first Rashi on Amud Beit. Lemi shehu gadol shehevi shtei se'arot. Someone who's already a gadol, so he normally has to fast. Shechayev be'inuye ve'af agav dilamachar lo chazile. Even though that person who set aside this food for the eruv, or set aside the food to eat, cannot eat it Hoyel v'chazi lekatan she'eno bar onshin. He nevertheless can set it aside for a young person who is not so restricted in terms of eating on Yom Kippur. He can set aside for a young person to eat. So do you not agree, Hillel says to Beit Shammai, that you're suggesting that, if we might learn from what you're suggesting, that any time that you put aside food, you can only put aside food that you yourself can eat, not that somebody else can eat? Do you not agree, however, that in this case you do agree that someone can put aside food that they themselves cannot eat? So, Amru Lahem Aval, as Rashi explains, Emet, that Shammai agrees, yes, in fact, we do agree that in that situation, someone who cannot partake of the food can set it aside for somebody else. So back in the Gemara, Amru lahen kashem shema arvim legadol b'yom kippurim came arvim lenazir b'yayim l'Yisrael b'truma. So we should use the same approach with regard to someone setting aside food that they themselves cannot eat, but others can, when it comes to nazir and wine, and Yisrael and truma when they're setting up an eruv. So Beit Shammai hatam ika seuda haruyami b'od yom. Said, no, you cannot make that leap. Why? Because when did they set aside the food for the Yom Kippur? They're setting it aside before Bein HaShmashot. They're setting it aside before Yom Kippur is started. At the time that they set it aside, that gadol could eat it. So Bein HaShmashot, when it regained its status as an eruv for Shabbos, at that time they could still eat it. Whereas with the Nazir and wine, or the Yisroel with Truma, when they set it aside before Shabbos, and it gained its status of an Eruv Bein HaShmashot coming into Shabbos, at that time, the Nazir could not drink it, and the Yisroel could not eat the Truma. So that's the difference in the cases. What was the status as Shabbos entered? And so that's why Beit Shammai would agree in the case of the gadol who sets aside food for the katan before Yom Kippur, but would not agree with Beis Hillel with regard to the cases of Nazir with Yain or Yisrael with Truma.
Is the are there laws of Reuven on Yom Kippur? Like it was not Shabbos, but it's just Yom Kippur. They have the same.
I assume it's the same Shabbat Shabbaton, so I assume it's the same.
It doesn't really matter when we're talking about Shabbos, Yom Kippur Shabbos, or just a regular.
I assume that's the case.
So when is he have the potential to eat it?
The
Bein HaShmashot, it's too late for him to eat it. I understand.
So he set it aside before Bein HaShmashot.
Okay.
So
he doesn't have potential to eat it when he needs it. He needs to be able to carry on Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
Right. He's not going to. He's not able to eat it at the time that he needs to carry.
So it's at the time that he set it aside, though, he was able to eat it, as opposed to the Nazir and Yain and the Yisroel and Truma, which is the time that they set it aside before Bein HaShmashot. They were not able to. Okay, so this discussion about whether or not the person themselves can set it aside if it doesn't meet their own ability to eat, Kaman, Delo Chananya. It doesn't go according to Chananya. Titanya, as we learn in a Brayso, Chananya Omer, Kol Atzman Shel Beit Shammai, Lo Hayu Moadim Be'eru, Ad Sheyotzi Mitato, V'Kol Klei Tashmishav. That Hananya is explicating what Beit Shammai was holding, that to make an eruv, not only would it have to be that Raya would eat that food, but you would have to do far more. So Hananya is interpreting Beit Shammai even a more stringent fashion, that you have to take everything you own, essentially everything you would need as a residence for the time of Shabbos, you would have to take it l'sham, to the place of that you're setting up your eruv. So it's not enough to set up food, even if you can eat it, to set up food that you would have for Shabbos to this place of eruv. You really would have to take everything that you would normally use on Shabbos. Kaman azla hadetanya, as we heard according to this baraisa, eruv bishchorim, that if he happens to make the eruv while he's wearing dark clothes, lo yetzei bilavanim, he shouldn't be walking around there in white clothes. Bilavanim lo yetzei bishchorim, and vice versa. Kaman, who is this called according to? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Chananya. That's according to Chananya. Va'alila b'Beit Shammai, that Chananya explains according to Beit Shammai. Let's be clear about this. So are you saying that if somebody sets it up in the dark clothes, but let's say he plans to wear the white clothes on Shabbos, he can only go there if he goes with the dark clothes? and only when he has all these things there. Hachi kamar erev bilavani v'hutzrach l'shchorim af bilavenim lo yetze. No, what he's saying is when he adds this extra clause about the color of the clothes you have to wear, he's saying that no, this is the case he's referring to. That really, it's as originally Hananya explained Beit Shammai, that you have to have all the things you would normally use on Shabbos at that place of residence. And let's say that you normally would use the dark clothes on Shabbos. So you have to have the dark clothes there. But on top of that, if you have to set up the Eruv in your white clothes, that not only do you have to have all the stuff you would normally have, including the dark clothes for Shabbos, but you also should be wearing the white clothes that you may not necessarily have used for Shabbos. It doesn't fall into the category of all the things you regularly use, but because you set up the Eruv with the white clothes, so an added thing that you have to have available to you there is the white clothes. Okay, come on. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Chanan Yehi v'ali b'Beit Shammai. And who does this interpretation hold to? That's the way Hananya is interpreting Beit Shammai. So again, we're coming back to the central issue of whether it has to be something that the person themselves setting up the Eru can eat, or whether it can be the normative thing, or what a regular person would have to eat. Sumchus Omer Bechulin. So Sumchus says that you can have chulin there. So we brought Sumchus made a distinction that the Tanakama said a Nazir can set up an Eruv with yayin, and a Yisroel can set up with truma. And it seems to be you should hold the same way for both. That is, either both situations you can set it up as an Eruv, or both situations you can. But Sumchus made a distinction between the two cases. Sumchus had said that for the Nazir, he can set it up with wine, but the Yisroel cannot set it up with Truma. It can only be with Chulin. So why does he make the distinction between the two? Ve'ilu Nazir b'yayin lo palig, so he shouldn't make an argument with Nazir and Yain either. My Tama, how does he make, what's the reasoning here? Efshar de machil an zirute. So you preface this question. Sumcha says it's easy with regard to the Nazir for him to get himself to a status where he can drink the wine by asking out of his Nazirus. Ihachi, but hang on a second, if that's the case, Trumanami afshar demeit shel lilave. So you also can ask, get out of the situation with Truma. How do you get out of the situation? I micha ole hadra litivla. If you say, how are you going to get out of the situation, you're going to say, okay, I'm not going to consider this truma. Let's say someone had made it truma. So how are you going to get out of it? You're going to say that truma was never taken from it, that this is regular demai, let's say, but then it's tevel. It's not only just demai, it's tevel. There's no truma being taken of it, so you can't eat it if it's tevel. So lelifrush Allah. So what can you do? So you can say, you know what, I have this bunch of food somewhere else, and I have this amount of food here that I want to make my Eruv from. So I'm going to, on Shabbos now, I'm going to be mafresh food from this food that was elsewhere. I'm going to make that truma, so that this food that I left as an Eruv is no longer tevel. So lo nechjedu chaverim litrom shelo min hamukaf. So there's a problem with that, though. What's the problem? That we're worried that other food that's elsewhere, that a chaver, someone who holds stringencies, he doesn't want to make the assumption that other food is still there. So he's basing his change of this food set aside from Eruv, from Tevel, so that it can be edible, by setting aside Truma on food elsewhere. So if you're worried that maybe that food elsewhere isn't there, if you're going to be machmir yourself, you're going to create a stringency and say, you know, what if some animal ate it, somebody else ate it, it's no longer there, my truma making that other food in another place isn't good in making it truma, and therefore the food that I left for an Eruv is still tevel, and I don't want to take any chances with that. So therefore he cannot be mafresh, the food set aside for the Eruv, he's not comfortable being mafresh of that from food elsewhere. So what can you do? Sorry, liforsh ala minei. So what can you do? You know what? Do the hafrasha, take the truma from the food that you set aside from Eruv. So you know the food is there. So take the 10%, or the 10% for truma, or the 2% rather for truma. Take it aside from the food that you left from Eruv. No, you know what? The late beishuura. So maybe there isn't enough there. You set aside exactly the amount that you needed for 2 meals, and you don't have the extra 2% that you can use to take off for Truma. Umay Pascha. Who are you kidding? See in Rashi, Umay Pascha Bitmia. No way. Kalamar, my high tirutza. What kind of answer is this? Vihi Pascha Tana, the milta de ein adam noten eruvo ela betzimtzum. You're saying you're going to leave only exactly the precise amount you need for 2 meals, and not even just 2% more. It's not reasonable that's what was left behind. So we see there is a way to be mafresh and be ois truma from the food that was left behind from eruv. So we should say, Sumchus, why do you make that differentiation? You said the Nazir can get out of his Nazirus to drink the wine. We can be mafresh this food that was left behind, so it's no longer truma. So Sumchus, why do you make a distinction between the two? Sumchus savar like Rabbanan. No, Sumchus had a different reason. He holds like Rabbanan, the Amre kol davar shehu mishum shvut gazru alav ben hashmashot. That whenever there's a gzeira made on the food, that because that we don't want to start setting aside truma on Shabbos, so we made a shvut here. They shouldn't even be able to do it bein hashmasot leading into Shabbos, and therefore you cannot do it the last minute. You can't be mafresh what was left behind to make it ois truma. So keman azla. So this whole discussion in terms of sorry, we're just talking about the new case. Come on, Azla Hadiknan. So who was according to the following Mishnah? We bring so Yesha Amru Hakol Fimasha Hu Adam Malo Kumso Mincha Umlo Chofnav Ktoret Vashote Malo Malek Lugmav B'Yom Kippurim. So we had a Mishnah that we've brought that shows that we hold according to the normative, the specific person rather. That when you're saying what is it that needs to be is the amount that makes one chayav or that one sets up as the requirement, we hold according to the specifics of the person involved. What are the examples? The first example is taking a kmitza for the korban mincha. That when you put in your 3 fingers and you file it off with your thumb, and that specific amount, that's specific to the person doing the kmitza. There isn't a standard amount that's the same for all people. You don't go out by the regular size of a normal person. You do it specifically for the person doing it. And similarly, moloch of nav ketoret, and you do with the palmful with regard to doing the ketoret, the avodah of the ketoret. And also in Yom Kippurim, what do you chayav on? The shotem malologmav, what fills the cheek. That's what you're chayav on. So that's again the size of the person, not the size of a regular person, but the size of the specific person. And we continue. Uvmazon shtei suudot le'eruv, and the amount that would sustain that person for 2 meals for an eruv. So that seems to go according to the mandamar that says that we hold according to the person setting up the eruv and not the regular person, the average person. Keman. Who does that opinion hold according to? That we go according to the specific person. Amar Rav Zera, Sumchusi. We goes according to Sumchus. So we saw that Sumchus earlier made the distinction that the only reason the Nazir can make it an Eru is because he can get out of the Nazirus. So if we see that according to Sumchus, it goes according to that specific person and not according to the average. The Amar Mai, the Chazile Ba'inan, Lema pligi ad Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and maybe this holds against the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. As we started this day's DAF with the Tanya and the Brisa, we learned Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer ma'arvim lechola ulezaken ulekatan, that when it comes to doing an eruv, the amount can be according to the specific person, the chola, the katan, and the zaken, whatever they would have for 2 meals, kedei mizona, for their specific purposes, the individual person. But then Rav Shimon ben Elazar muddied the waters by saying Uluravtan besuda beino nichol kol adam. But then when it comes to the glutton, you go hold according to the regular person. So now we're confused by what he holds. No, tirguma achula chola v'zaken. No, really, Rav Shimon ben Elazar holds like the regular person, like the specific person. That specific person, if there's a chola, then it's a lesser amount. If there's a zaken, it's a lesser amount than what they would set aside for an eruv, and that's what we hold by. It's the person setting up the eruv and what they can eat, like sumchus as well. Aval Rav Tan. So why does he bring the idea of Rav Tan that's according to the regular person? That doesn't seem to fit in at all. No, Patela Dato Eitzel Kol Adam. The glutton is such a rare event that we'll make an exception with him and we'll say that he can go by the regular person. But normally we go by the person setting up the eruv. It's specific to that person.
So I can be summoned on your eruv if I'm bigger than you? You set it up.
So it depends. So as usual, it depends who you're holding by. So according to the first reason brought in the Mishnah, and the interpretations that we're getting from Sumchas and Rav Shimon ben Eliezer, it's according to the person who's setting it up, and not according to what the regular person would eat. But with the glutton, there seems to be, even in their opinion, Rav Shimon ben Eliezer, there seems to be an exception even to that rule. Even according to those who hold that opinion, some at least hold an exception. There is, however, another opinion that holds that it's by the regular person. Doesn't seem to be the main opinion presented here. As for what the halacha is, I'm definitely not the person to ask. Okay, so returning Ulakoin b'Bayt Pras. So we learned in the Mishnah that you can set up an ERU in situations where you might think that the person setting it up would not be able to access it. For instance, a Kohen sets up an ERU in a Bayt Pras. Reminder, a Bayt Pras, we're to finish at 9:30, I think. Okay. I think we're okay on time, I think. So a Kohen set up on a Beta Pras. What's a Beta Pras? Beta Pras is a field where we know somewhere there had been a body, but now it's being plowed. So it's within the realm of possibility that there were bits of bone that were large enough that you would be made tameh, and they were brought up to the surface by the plow. So there could be lying on the surface little bits of bone, large enough to make one tameh, but not so large that you necessarily see it and avoid it easily. So we say, however, the Mishnah said that a Kohen would be able to set up his eruv in such a field. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Menapech Adam Beta Pras V'Holech. No, you know how you get around that problem is that you have a bellows in front of you, or you have very strong lungs, and as you're walking slowly through this field, you're blowing or using the bellows ahead of you so that any small bits of bone that may have been brought up to the surface will be blown aside, and so you have a pathway in front of you that you're confident will not make you tameh. Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami, Mishmeit Rabbi Yehuda Amar, Beta Pras Shenidash Tahor. And parenthetically to this, if you have a Beta Pras which not only has been plowed but also has been trampled on to a great extent, then you don't have to worry about these little bones at all, because if it's trampled to that extent, any small bones will be trampled to dust, and that already is bits of bone, fragments so small that you don't have to worry about making one tummy. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af Beit HaKfarot, and the Mishnah finally brought a case of a Beit HaKfarot, that what if you have a cemetery, you can leave an Eruv even in a cemetery, how's a Kohen going to get there? So Tana mipnei sheyachol lachutz ve'elech b'sheda teva umigdal. That how can a Kohen get there? You make a lachutz, you make a barrier between the Kohen and the cemetery plot. How so? You put the Kohen in an enclosed compartment, either a cabinet or a wagon or a closet, something in which he's completely enclosed, so that he's carried over through the cemetery until he gets to the place of the Eruv, and then there has to be some way that he can access, either there's a window that opens outside the cabinet, they can access the Eruv from there. So it's within the realm of possibility that he can still get to the Eruv. Kasavar, as we continue in the Gemara, Kasavar Ohel Zaruk Shmei Ohel. So this only makes sense according to the opinion that such an enclosed compartment has the status of an Ohel, has a status that it creates a barrier between an ohel between yourself and the tmeus. Will be plukta dahani tanai, but that itself is a difference of opinion between tanaim. The Tanya, as we learn in the Baraisa, hanichnas la'eretz ha'amim, that the lands outside of Eretz Yisrael, they're less sure what's tamei and what's not, and therefore the Rabbanan made everything outside of Eretz Yisrael the level of tuma de Rabbanan. So someone who enters any area outside Eretz Yisrael, b'sheda teva u'migdal, who has this barrier around them, Rebbe metame. Rebbe says it's not good, that doesn't act as an ohel. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda mitahar. But Rabbi Yehuda said it is good as a barrier. B'mai kamiflagi, what's the source of their difference of opinion? Man savar ohel zaruk lav shmei ohel, man savar ohel zaruk shmei ohel. Whether their difference of opinion is whether or not this enclosed compartment can be considered a barrier in the sense of an ohel. V'ha de Tanya Rabbi Yehuda omer me'arvin lekohen tahor bitruma Be'arvim l'kohen tahor, b'truma tahora bekever. So there we say that a kohen who starts off tahor, that he can use a truma tahora bekever, that he can still use that, he can still get to the truma which is tahor at the kever. Heichi azil, how would he get there? B'sheda teva umigdal. He would get there in an enclosed compartment such as a closet, wagon, or some such enclosure. Okay, and I think we'll hold it there.
You never see that presently. Like, you could see.